and I call it the like a cross-disciplinary, transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and interdisciplinary analysis of sound, because we're looking at sound from multiple perspectives. This is my mini library. I have a much bigger library. So, you know, what's the light in here? The linguistics of sound, or the physics of sound. You know, you strum a chord or you play an instrument and it emits a sound. There's a sound that's emitted from the instrument. You know, so what determines the amplitude? What determines the frequency? When you play a note, when you play a note on an instrument, what determines amplitude? What determines frequency? What determines acceleration? What determines momentum? What determines velocity? What is the sound trajectory that occurs? So we taking a physics analysis of sound. We're not looking at sound from a music perspective, from a music theory perspective. Because if you look at sound from a musical perspective, you have to get into the chromatic scales, the diatonic scales. Primarily the diatonic scales was like extracted from the chromatic scales to form the musical structure in the Western Hemisphere. And you know why is there a low? Why E chord is a low E and a high E? Is an octave. What is amplitude? What causes amplitude? You know, what causes frequency? And when there's a force, let's take an analysis of the physics of sound on a very molecular level, on an infinitesimal level. When there's a force, this force creates an impact. This impact creates energy, or emerges energy, and the force creates an impact and vibrates. Energy emerges and vibrates, and then it propagates at, let's say, around 700 plus miles an hour. And the sound is propagating. You know, now sound is illustrated on a two-dimensional surface, but sound from a three-dimensional perspective is an expanding sphere. I can never pronounce it. That would expanding bubble. So we have the sound that propagates at 700 miles an hour. That's amplitude, that's frequency, that's velocity. So you have like this expanding bubble that propagates in nature. You know, intensity determines the distance at which the acceleration of the sound propagates. So we have amplitude, we have frequency, we have velocity, we have acceleration, and we have momentum. So what is the disparity? What is the correlation? What is the relationship between amplitude and frequency? What causes amplitude? So why you could have an A chord, but yet you have another note, but it's a higher pitch. So what causes amplitude is when there's a force, and this force creates an energy that vibrates from an impact that lacks tension. Now, this is a fascinating physics phenomenon. The distinction between amplitude and frequency is when a force is applied, and this force that's applied that creates an impact, this impact that creates this energy that vibrates and propagates at a minimum of 700 miles an hour. It does not arise from an already established tension. This is the disparity. This is what separates amplitude from frequency when it comes to sound. If we take a physics analysis of sound, now frequency now is based on pitch, cycle per second, so named after hertz. What causes frequency is when there's a force that's applied to an already established tension. Now, in some syntactical contexts, amplitude is also applied to when a force is applied to an already established tension. But the higher frequency in that context is if that particular force is applied to a much higher tension. So hence the reason we find when a string on the instrument, like let's say a string or any object or any sound that is created from a force, an already established fundamental force that has a fundamental tension. This already established tension, where there's a force that creates the impact, and this energy that emerges and vibrates, it causes the sound to propagate with an intensity and a much higher frequency, because the impact derived from an already established tension. That is the distinction between amplitude and frequency when it comes to the physics of sound, primarily in music. I hope that made a lot of sense for you.